Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Morning everyone, and best wishes for all of us. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin, wa bihi nasta'inu ala umuri dunya waddin. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah ajma'in amma ba'd. Praise and gratitude for the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has given His mercy and grace to us, so that on this occasion I can give an explanation regarding the material. But before that, let me introduce myself. I am Ghani Kalsya Pujangga, with student number 2017404063 from class 5 TBI B. This video is mid-semester assignment for the History of Islamic Education course. I will present material on the history of Islamic education about Islamic education during the time of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, peace be upon him, and the time of Khulafaur Rasyidin on this video. First, the progress of Islamic education that we can feel at this time is inseparable from the role of the Prophet Muhammad, who is the main cover, who is the main mover and the first teacher in the world of Islamic education. Rasulullah is a figure who is used as a benchmark in the teaching of an ideal Islamic education. He was able to achieve educational goals marked by real practice carried out by friends and Muslims, as well as the many developments in science at the time. Then the study of the history of Islamic education is very important, especially for Muslim students and Muslim leaders. Because by studying the history of Islamic education, we can uncover the causes of the progress and decline of Islam both in the teaching and also in learning process. Okay guys, this video, the next slide is about the table content. First is Prophet Muhammad's Islamic education in Mecca. Second one is Prophet Muhammad Islamic education in Medina. Number 3, Islamic education of friends of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And then number 4, Islamic education of friends of Umar bin Khattab. Number 5, Islamic education of friends of Ali bin Abi Talib. And the last, number 6, Islamic education of friends of Uthman bin Affan. There is the 6 subpoints that we can discuss and we can learn on this video. First is Islamic education at the time of the Prophet Muhammad SAW. Education is a process that directs humans to good things. It can be said that education is a process of transforming and also internalizing knowledge. And in reality, humans really need education because with education, humans can develop all their potential. In addition, education is a process of changing attitudes for the better. Therefore, it can be said that the existence of education is one of the important things in the view of Islam. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad, Islamic education took place in 2 periods. First is the Mecca period and the second one is Medina period. The Mecca period is the initial stage of the development of Islamic education and is centered in Mecca city, while the Medina period is a further period of the development of Islamic education as well as the center of its movement activities. First, we can discuss about the Islamic education in Mecca period. Islamic education in Mecca is marked by several things. The Mecca period is the beginning of the first revelation. The Meccan period is the beginning of the first revelation. At the time, he was still doing da'wah, or teaching in secret. The learning teaching techniques used by the Prophet Muhammad were taken from practice that can be assessed within the context of educational teaching. These techniques include telling, learning teaching through observation, demonstration method, learning teaching by comparison, question and answer, and also learning by doing, experiencing. Rasulullah SAW always tried to adapt to his community environment so as not to be carried away into the condition and circumstance of his environment. With his extraordinary natural potential, he was able to maintain his balance so as not to be carried away by the cultural currents of his society, which at the time tend to be negative. There are several verses of the Quran, which are the initial instructions for the Prophet to give warnings or to give teachings to his people, namely Quran Surah Al-Alaq, verses 1 up to 5, and also Quran Surah Al-Mudassir, verses 1 up to 7. Whenever he received a revelation, he immediately conveyed it to his people, accompanied by explanations, examples of his practice. The Apostle began his duty to convey Islam teachings right after the revelation of the second letter, namely Al-Mudassir 1 to 7. However, this was done secretly, which was still addressed to his family and closest people. The first people who accepted the teaching of Islam at that time were his family, from his wife, namely Siti Khadijah, Ali bin Abi Talib, and Said bin Thabit. Then the closest people in question were the companions of the Apostle, such as Abu Bakr, and then after Abu Bakr were addressed to other friends and were known as Al-Sabiqun al-Awwal. The implementation of Islamic education for the first time was centered and carried out at the Prophet's house. In addition to hiding, another thing to do is openly. This appeal was addressed to the family of Bani Abu Abdul Muttalib. Some of them welcomed it well and some rejected, such as Abu Lahab and his wife. This overstage is marked by the presence of Quran Surah Al-Ashura and Quran Surah Al-Hijr. Then after the first reached the Apostle immediately spread revelation to all residents of the Arabian Peninsula, both residents of Mecca and from outside of Mecca. All of this requires a long process. It is not an easy thing to invite the people of Mecca to follow the teaching of the Prophet. There are many obstacles and resistance in every attempt made. Despite all that, the Apostle always responded patiently. The pattern of education is the same as the clandestine stage, namely teaching about monotheism as the basis for Islam. And the next slide is according to Mahmud Yunus. Through his writings, he said that the development of Islamic education during the Mecca period include 1. Religious education. In religious education, it is not permissible to associate the name of Allah with the name of idols. Second one is academic and scientific education. In this education studies human life starting from a clot of blood to form a form and studies the events or phenomena of the universe. Number 3 is moral and character education. In this education, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught his companions to have good morals according to the teachings of monotheism. And the last, number 4, is physical education for health. This education emphasizes or prioritizes health values such as clean lines of clothes, clean lines of the body, and also bed. After the Islamic education Mecca period, the next is Islamic education Medina period. At the time of Prophet Muhammad, Islamic education was carried into the period Mecca and also Medina. The Medina period is the second phase of Al-Munawwarah as an advanced stage of Islamic development, as well as the center of its activities. Number 1. Implementation of Islamic education in Medina. During the educational process in Medina, the Prophet did many things. The first thing that the Prophet Muhammad did in Medina was to lay a solid foundation in the life of Islam. Mosque and center of worship activities and to teach education Islam. In this mosque, the Prophet taught and his teaching present the principles of Islamic teachings. In other words, Islamic education in Medina, the learning process first took place in a mosque. Second is Prophet Muhammad SAW, peace be upon him, united the Ansar and Muhajirin on the basis of religion. And next, classify and develop a charter for the brotherhood of the non-Muslim population of Medina, namely Jews and Christians, to tolerate each other, not to interfere with each other, to always live in harmony, and to jointly defend the city of Medina. And then the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, eradicated the remains of hostility and conflict between tribes, by tying the ties of brotherhood between them. And the last, the Sharia of Zakat and fasting came down, which was an education for citizens in social responsibility to establish cooperation and help each other. That is about the implementation of Islamic education in Medina. Number 2 is discuss about Islamic education materials in Medina. Mahmud Yunus stated that the essence of Islamic education and teaching given by the Prophet, the Medina period was in addition to religious education, moral education, and also health education. It was also expanded with Sharia education materials related to the community, for example, matters related to the association between fellow human beings, such as civil law. And then matters related to qisas, such as criminal law. And then matters related to the economy and government. According to Zulhairini, the Islamic education material in Medina, which is a continuation of the educational material in Mecca, is social, political, and citizenship education. First, Zuhairini said that the Islamic education material in Medina, which is a continuation of the educational material in Mecca, is social, political, and citizenship education. First is socio-political education and citizenship. In the Medina phase, the educational material provided is more complex in scope compared to the Mecca phase educational material. And among the implementation of Islamic education in Medina are as follows. Number 1 is ukhuwah, brotherhood, education among the Muslims. Number 2, social welfare education, namely the fulfillment of basic needs rather than daily life. Number 3, family and relative welfare education, such as husband, wife, and children, because this is the core of the formation of a wider common human society. And number 4, defense and security education. The existence of troops or security and defense units is an absolute thing that must exist to support the carrying out of Islamic da'wah, so that the delivery of da'wah is more effective and comprehensive. Next is the children's education in Islam. Children in Islam are the inheritors of Islamic teachings developed by the Prophet Muhammad, and it is the younger generation of Muslims who will continue the mission of conveying Islam to all corners of the world. The outlines of children's education material in Islam exemplified by the Prophet Muhammad SAW, peace be upon him, as hinted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the letter Luqman, verses 13 up to 19 are as follows. Tawhid education, prayer education, education of manners in deliberation, education of etiquette and manners in the family, and personality education, and also the last health education. That is about the children's education in Islam. Next, talking about the methods of teaching Islamic education at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. To create a conducive and pleasant atmosphere in the teaching the Prophet Muhammad using various methods. This is done to avoid boredom, and among the methods used by the Prophet Muhammad are 1. Lecture method, number 2. Dialogue, number 3. Discussion and question answer, number 4. Demonstration method, and number 5. Experimental method. In addition, the method of moral education is also carried out by reading verses of the Quran, which contain stories of the people at same time, so that lessons are taken. That is about the methods that use of the Prophet Muhammad to teaching Islamic education on the Medina period. After Islamic education of the Rasulullah period, then we will talk about Islamic education at the time of the friendship of the Khulafaur Rasyidin. It is namely Abu Bakar as-Siddiq, Umar bin Khattab, Ali bin Abi Talib, and also Utsman bin Affan. First, Islamic education of friends, Abu Bakar as-Siddiq. The first Islamic Caliph appointed and agreed upon by the companions of the Prophet and the Muslims of Islam was Abu Bakar as-Siddiq. Initially, Abu Bakar as-Siddiq was appointed directly by the Messenger of Allah to replace him as the prayer price. From his, Umar bin Khattab concluded that Abu Bakr was the person who was directly appointed by the Prophet to be the first caliph because he was mandated to replace the position of the prayer price, which at the time was the most important thing. So the companions of the Prophet pledged Abu Bakr as-Siddiq as the first caliph with the Saqifa pledge. Although Abu Bakr's reign was quite short, he was able to play an important role in fighting Riddah, such as destroying false prophets, people who were reluctant to pay tax and zakat, and fighting tribes who want to live and teaching of Islam. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq also played a role in collecting the writings of the Quran by sending Zayd bin Thabit. The Islamic education of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. First, talking about the educational materials, include 1. Faith education, by instilling that Allah SWT is the only God worthy on worship. Number 2. Moral education, For example, the etiquette of entering the house, honesty, good manners in neighbors, and how to get along in society. Number 3, worship education, such as procedures for performing prayers, fasting, zakat, and hajj. Number 4, health education, for example, movements in prayer that can improve one's physical and spiritual abilities. That's about the educational materials and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And then, talking about educational institution, mosques and kutabs are facilities that become a place or place for learning that existed during the caliphate of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq to learn knowledge about the teachings of Islam. After Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, number 2 is Islamic education during Umar bin Khattab. The implementation of Islamic education during the Caliph Umar bin Khattab was more advanced than the previous period because the condition of the country during Umar's was safe and stable. The mosque was designed as an educational center. This was proven when the ordered his commanders, if they had conquered an area, to immediately build a place of education as well as a place of worship. And after that, Umar chose teachers in each region to teach Islamic education about the contents of the Quran and the other Islamic teachings to the residents of the region. In the teaching, it is also talk about the use of Arabic, which is intended to make it easier for residents to explore the teaching of Islam. Teaching methods also began to be developed at this time. This is marked by the teaching process with the students in the circle around the teacher in the courtyard of the mosque. Umar bin Khattab is also called the father of the kindergarten science, because during his reign, a special place for children to study was established, namely in the corners of the mosque. At this time also gave birth to many scholars such as 1. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, number 2 Ibnu Mas'ud, Mu'az bin Jabal, Ubadah, Abu Darda, and Amru bin As. In the reign of Umar bin Khattab, the main lessons were still related to reading and writing the Quran, memorizing and capturing the meaning of its contents, Aqidah and worship, as well as the main points of the Islamic religion. Other materials determined by Umar bin Khattab were teaching children to swim, to archery, to horse riding, and the art of war. That is sub material about the Islamic education during Umar bin Khattab. Next, Islamic education during Uthman bin Affan. Uthman bin Affan's education system continued that education built by the previous government. At this time, Islamic education is more easily achieved by students who intend to demand Islamic teachings. More educational centers are available so that Islamic education can be reached not only in one area. Educators or the teachers at this time are not appointed or approved by the government. They work only with the hope of blessing for Allah, because the subject of Islamic education is almost completely left to the people. The people who set their own education pattern so that there was instability on the world of education at the time. One of the services of the Caliph Uthman bin Affan, who was very influential, was the collection of written verses of the Quran, which aimed to minimize disputes in the reading of the Quran. That is Islamic education during Caliph Uthman bin Affan. Next, the last Islamic education during Caliph Ali bin Abi Talib. On this period, most these troops are unstable because the political conditions at the time were chaotic. Caliph Ali was more concerned with public safety than the education sector. However, in another opinion, it is stated that during Ali's time, formal education emerged, which included developing written and reading subject matter under an educational institution. Although Caliph Ali was not too focused on education, at this time the educational process was mostly developed with the teaching and also civilizing of the Quran and As-Sunnah. So, the Islamic education during Ali bin Abi Talib not concerned in educational sector, but its rise of formal education emerged with include developing written and reading subject matter. And then educational centers during the friendship periods are Khulafaur Rasyidin. This material talking about the educational centers during the Khulafaur Rasyidin period. Number one, Mecca. The first teacher in Mecca was Mu'az bin Jabal, who taught the Quran and Fiqh. Number two, in Medina, famous friends include Abu Bakar, Utsman bin Affan, Ali bin Abi Talib, and other friends. Number three, in Basra. The famous friend here is Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. He is an expert in fiqh and the Quran. And number four, in Kufah. Famous friends here are Ali bin Abi Talib and Abdullah bin Mas'ud, who teach the Quran. He is an expert in interpretation and hadith and fiqh. That's all the educational center during the Khulafaur Rasyidin period. We go to the last slide is about talking conclusion. We can conclude that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a teacher who was used as uswatun repertoire, where he was able to teach his friends and teach Muslims amid the threat of the Quraysh infidels. At first, the education carried by Rasulullah, peace be upon him, was carried out secretly at the house of Arqam bin Abil Arqam. The teaching was done openly by Rasulullah, peace be upon him, after getting enough support from the Arabs. Education at the time of the Prophet Muhammad was focused on the study of monotheism to strengthen the faith of Muslims at the time. After the death of Rasulullah, Khulafaur Rasyidin took over the leadership in education so that Islam still exists. Islam still exists among the Arabs. Education during the Khulafaur Rasyidin period began to expand the study of educational teaching, such as Kalam, Sufism, medicine, and so on. At the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Islamic education was continuing the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad with material about monotheism, such as teaching worship and clean lines. Then during the time of Umar bin Khattab, the teachings of the Quran and Hadith began to be debated, and many Islamic scientists emerged. At the time of Utsman bin Affan, the deepening of the interpretation of the Quran and Hadith began to be carried out by producing Ottoman interpretations. While education at the time of Ali bin Abi Talib, the last of Caliph, the teaching of Islam began to be hampered because of conflicts between brothers, so Ali bin Abi Thalib was more concerned, not in education and sector, but he concerned with making his people safe and living prosperously. That is the reference that I used to making this presentation today. Thank you guys for your attention. I apologize for my inconveniences. I close. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.